Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV Alternative Media Television. Vladimir Putin to go nuclear on U.S. sanctions. This very serious, very controversial report, I'm sure, but I'm going to get into the hard-hitting facts of what's just happening right now with the economic war. The U.S. attacking Russia, aiming to demonize Putin, his government to potentially oust Putin, the rising East, his relationship with China, and what the real Cold War is focused on today. Before we get started, check out our sponsor, Conflicted the Game. Get multiple decks, choose from multiple decks, and learn more about your opponent, their survival skills, and how they would react and act in a worst-case economic collapse scenario. Great stocking stuffer. And also check out Vintage Founding Fathers playing cards. Get them all today at the link below at conflictedthegame.com. So what do I mean by Russia going nuclear? As a result, and in reaction to US-based moves, this economic war that's being fought digitally, technologically at this very moment against Russia. We've seen this manifest over the past few months with the US and Western media positioning Russia as the demon in Ukraine. Any report that you read in Western media, whether or not it's ABC News, CNBC, or CNN, suggests that Russia invaded Ukraine, that Putin decided to militarily move in this part of the world, when the opposite is actually the truth. All of this was a US-led inspired coup to overthrow the previous friendly Russian Yanukovych government so that the US could pressure Putin into a corner, force him to act, and of course the European Union and Europe, which is heavily dependent on natural gas and energy supplies from Russia that move directly through the Ukraine to the European Union, could control and better monopolize that energy route. As a result, the U.S. has even positioned Putin and certain conspiracies, like the downing of Flight MH17, accusing the Russian government of shooting down that plane, even though there is no evidence, and there is a lack thereof of evidence to support that that was the actual truth. In fact, satellites show, released by numerous sources online, that the new government in control of Ukraine, inspired and a puppet of the West, had actually been flying jets behind the aircraft at the time of its downing, making no sense and not justifying an attack on Putin and his government. But as a result of all this and these failed false flags, these failed attempts to demonize Putin, even though the dumb shit sheeple that consume the mainstream media largely buy off on it, because it's failed to inspire the real war and the real retaliation that the United States wants to justify the new war, they have since implemented severe economic sanctions on Russia's economy, collapsing the ruble overnight. Over the past few months, it's lost over half of its value, and on Tuesday, it lost a stunning 20%. This is economic Armageddon for the Russian people, and not only is the ruble collapsing as a result of these aggressive actions by the West, but inflation is rampant, expected to hit double digits, over 10% next year. This is cataclysmic for the Russian economy, as well as the oil drop that we've seen oil crushed over recent months, surprising many analysts and Wall Street at large, aside from the insiders that are pulling the heartstrings, with an aggressive drop in WTI, Western Texas Intermediate crude, and also Brent crude, which influences geopolitical prices and really influences the prices at the pump, hitting near 60, under 60 for the first time in 5 years. This rout in oil that specifically targets the Putin government, that specifically puts pressure on Russia and enemies of the United States, including Iran and their nuclear program. Anything below $100 a barrel puts pressures on numerous countries around the world that depend largely on the oil trade. Countries like Venezuela, that oil accounts for 70%. Oil itself, 70% of its state's revenues, which is used to subsidize vast social programs in their country. Russia, I was looking at a report given by the IEA, an energy organization, accounted near 70% of Russia's economy and revenues are dependent on oil and natural gas and petroleum-related products, nearly 70% of Russia's economy. So a drop to these levels in Brent crude is truly catastrophic for this country, catastrophic for Putin, and this is exactly the intention that the West has been pushing to hopefully ouster Putin in his strengthening ties, namely with China, the rising East, taking over the petrodollar, which has largely been priced in dollars throughout many of our and most of all of our lives. All of this changing and all of this at the forefront of this economic attack. We saw the same thing before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, with Franklin Delano Roosevelt at the time imposing an oil embargo on Japan. And they responded swiftly, quickly, and violently with the bombing and attack in Honolulu, which was the precursor to the United States' entrance into World War II and the devastation of thousands and thousands of lives and countries at large. We are experiencing the same thing today, and it's exactly why Putin will respond not just militarily, but with a nuclear option. And what I mean by that is that I think Putin will hit the United States in the balls where it is weakest, at the core, structurally at the core. And we saw this with the May 2010 flash crash, where the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped 1,000 points in a mere seconds. It's completely unexplainable outside of the media saying that a fat finger pressed a button and there was some kind of anomaly in the market, when really it was an attack on the economic infrastructure of the system itself, whether or not that was internally a test by the U.S. government to see how markets would react, or it was an external threat coming from a rogue nation or terrorist organization. I think that in response, not only will Putin react militarily and escalate tensions, which he's only reacting to as a byproduct of U.S.-led intervention and inspired revolution in this part of the world, will also react technologically, and I think could potentially decimate U.S. stock markets with an internal attack, which could be driven by some kind of computer virus or some kind of anomaly similar to what we saw with the May 2010 flash crash. All of this an economic war. Again, Russia entirely dependent, its entire economy largely dependent on the oil trade itself, petroleum-related products, natural gas to Europe as trading partners, all of that cut off, and really being given no other options, similarly to Japan before the outbreak of World War II. They have some $400 billion currency reserves that they can use to stem the bleeding a bit for some time. They've risen interest rates to 17% from 10.5%. Compare that and contrast that to 0% interest rates here in the artificial economy that makes up the United States, and super leverage and the derivative markets here on Wall Street. They can do that for some time, but in order to really stem the bleeding, they're going to have to go nuclear. They're going to have to react with a nuclear option, militarily, and I also believe technologically. And I think that the Russian people will be behind Vladimir Putin, because I think people are waking up to the fact that it's the United States hanging on to its last semblance of economic power as it crumbles to the ground, as Rome once did, due to excessive spending, an $18 trillion plus egregious national debt, countless wars overseas that have only been continued and propagated by President Barack Obama, and just this lack of complete morals and regard for constitutional principles and values that have made America great over the past several hundred years, all corrupted structurally at the very core. And that's why if Putin is sitting on his hands at the moment thinking what he should do next, should really, and I think will, attack the United States where it's weakest, structurally, economically, fundamentally, internally, specifically targeting Wall Street, our economic system, these QE programs, 0% interest rates. All of this could shed thousands of points in a matter of nanoseconds, based largely on computer trading and an algorithm that is the function of Wall Street today. This unbelievable world of hyperspeed trading, government intervention, manipulation, and bank bailouts. All of this leading to not just technological war, but also physical war. And the United States behind it, Western interests behind it, forcing Putin's hand and expecting him to react so that they can justify war, so that they can justify a further escalation in what we're seeing overseas today. And this is incredibly dangerous. Everything that's happening geopolitically with this large macro move in oil, the rise in the dollar, notice how the dollar is strengthening, puts specific pressure on Russia and enemies of the United States. And it's about to reach a boiling point, my friends. I'm Christopher Green. Get it out everywhere. Make it viral, hard-hitting and in your face. And click the link below to support our sponsor, ConflictedTheGame.com.